Takako Shimura's Horo Musuko, known in the West as Wandering Sun, is a manga which has had a profound influence on depictions of LGBT subjects, cross-dressing, and gender bending in Japanese fiction. It's to the point where I've seen scholarly discussion of works described as post-Shimura as an apt acknowledgement of her impact. For those unfamiliar, Horo Musuko is chiefly the story of Shuichi Nitori, described as a boy who wants to be a girl, and her classmate Yoshino Takatsuki, a girl who wants to be a boy. Now, although it's accurate to say Nitori is trans, Yoshino's classification is a bit more complicated. Despite being presented as Nitori's counterpart and closest confidant for a significant chunk of the manga's runtime, later on Yoshino begins to question their own motivations and identity. Only a few chapters later, Yoshino seems perfectly comfortable presenting as a girl, and the final pages of the manga give narration explicitly describing the whole arc of the narrative. One of them wanted to be a boy, one wanted to be a girl, one stopped wanting to be a boy. That's all there is to it. I bring this up because there's a very obvious similarity and perhaps shared lineage to be found in one Naoto Shirogane, a party member in the hit Atlas JRPG Persona 4, a game which was developed and released contemporary to the run of Horo Musuko. Now, obviously there is a notable difference in presentation of these two. You don't even learn that Naoto is a girl until the climax of her arc, with the game leading you to believe that age is the only factor in her character conflict. And although the ensuing fight might take a while, the cutscene that immediately follows features the plain and blatant declaration that she is a woman, giving you fleetingly little time to even speculate any other conclusion. Should you reach the end of Naoto's social link, she reaffirms this declaration, but even if you don't interact with her at all after her dungeon, the canonical epilogue in Persona 4 The Golden shows her with a much more feminine appearance, an obvious signifier of her staying true to the stated development. In this video, I won't be factoring in any spin-off material, but even accounting for those, the conclusion would remain the same. Naoto is not trans. Such a fact is inarguable. A more accurate description would be that she wanted to be a boy and then stopped wanting to be a boy. Now, obviously, that's not all there is to it. Her motivation, her progression, the quality of her writing, and as much as I'd like to make this video pretending to have no awareness of the greater discussion surrounding this character, to simply take the game in a vacuum, the fact that I'm making a video on this particular subject kinda already gives acknowledgement to the apparent controversy. I know that there are woke people who think Naoto is bad, and anti-woke people who think Naoto is good, and other woke people who think Naoto is good but they sympathize with the first woke people, and non-woke people who have the median opinion of those last two. We all wish we didn't know. Having much experience with the source material, and being famous for my genius-level observations on the Persona series, I thought that I could give my own analysis of the text, appraisal of the common interpretations, and explanation for the who, the what, and the why. This video will assume you already know enough about Persona 4 to understand what I'm talking about, so I won't waste time explaining the premise of the game. Naoto's version of the unsubtle and obvious explanation of personal narrative that every character delivers at the end of their dungeon indicates two factors which contributed to her motivation, but it's possible to interpret both of these as branching from the same root. I've gathered a collection of what I surmise to be representative samples of interpretation on the matter.
Her tale is one of sexism. It's a commentary on traditional Japanese views of women. How within her profession, she wants to be seen as an equal to her male peers.
She actually represents sexism in the workplace.
In my interpretation, I find Naoto's story to be very progressive for 3 reasons. 1, it covers workplace gender inequality. 2, it covers unequal representation in media, and 3, it shows double standards and unfair societal expectations that females are held up to in our world.
In Japanese society, where sexism and gender stereotypes are still rife, many talented women despise the gender they were born as due to the limits it places on their career prospects and desire their capabilities to be recognized by males in positions of power.
A lot of women aren't treated with the same respect as male coworkers or colleagues because of the fact they're a woman. That is what Naoto's arc covers.
Couldn't have put it better myself. To explore this interpretation, I think it's worth going over every example of sexism being mentioned in relation to Naoto. Yes, every single one in the whole game. Don't worry, it won't take too long. Again, Naoto is a late-game character whose identity is only revealed at the end of her dungeon, so that is where we'll start. The first example I think can be pointed to comes before Naoto explains her situation. This line could be read as referring to gender discrimination, but considering the context, it could just as easily be in reference to Naoto's age-related insecurity. I'll mention it here regardless and leave you to make your own conclusion. The next one comes, obviously, during that explanation.
それに警察は男社会。軽視される理由がこれ以上増えたら、誰にも必要とされなくなります。
なな思い込みだ。
Pretty straightforward. I will say the "you don't know that" response is weird coming from Kanji. I mean, he's a straight-talking victim of sexism who's distrustful of cops and infatuated with Naoto. You'd think he'd be more receptive. Since it would undermine the premise if we were to take him seriously here, we'll just say that it was him being dumb. Immediately after this, the solution to her arc is given by Yukiko, possibly the least qualified character to be delivering this line. Therefore, this is the last we hear about it in the remainder of the arc. Now, in the rest of the main story, sexism directed towards Naoto is never addressed. As far as anyone besides you may be concerned, her gender is a settled matter, and although an individual inclined towards wokeism might call the behavior from Yosuke or Teddy inappropriate, Naoto herself seems to not take the prodding any more harshly than any other girl in the party. This isn't to say that the game never alludes to sexism. In fact, the main villain is quite literally a violent misogynist. But for whatever reason, the narrative never makes any connection between the evil sexist cop man and the girl whose major motivations include fear of gender discrimination in the police department. If we want to find even a single other example, then we'll have to look in the optional side content. In Naoto's rank social link, if you choose to jump in and protect her, Naoto will say the following:
I can't imagine becoming a woman only to have a man protect me.
I'm not sure how controversial this may be, but since Naoto herself is relating the chivalrous behavior of you to gender, I think it can reasonably qualify. But it would be another odd example, because not only is it directed at you, it is completely optional. If this line was an attempt to tackle gender discrimination, it would mean it's calling out the player. However, as a few of you may know, this option is required to pursue a relationship with Naoto. In fact, you get the option to date her literally right after this line. Unless one was to argue that dating Naoto is a punishment, then I'd have to say the game is rewarding you here, in which case it would be very strange for this to count as an example of mentioning sexism. Again, I will leave you to your own conclusion as we move on to the next example. Just kidding! That's it. That's every single example in over 100 hours of video game. Told you it wouldn't take long. I think a lot of the discourse surrounding this game comes from people who either never played the game, don't remember it because it's too long, or who exaggerate the complexity of its social commentary. Because, as you've seen here, despite many people declaring the writing of Naoto's story to be some feminist masterpiece, it barely ever talks about sexism and never goes into detail or says anything meaningful. There is no depiction nor description of any sexist character in relation to Naoto, just the occasional suggestion of Naoto's insecurity having a legitimate external source. In fact, once the truth about her being a girl comes out, the general public is only ever shown to be even more in love with her than before. Her arc mostly focuses on her age rather than her gender, as if the latter was a detail hastily added on to an existing arc. Which might actually be the case. Persona 4's development was infamously rocky, and Naoto wasn't always planned to be a girl in the first place. But even with the little focus this aspect receives, the 2.5 examples undermine themselves with dismissal or contradiction. And speaking of contradiction, there's a really obvious one I noticed about Persona 4 and Naoto in general that I think uproots the feminist interpretation. First observation, one of Naoto's biggest stated motivations is the implied lack of leading female representation in the detective fiction she's read, contributing to her image of a cool detective as being an adult male. I guess we're going to ignore the fact that her mom was a detective, maybe they just didn't catch that on the second draft. Second observation, in the 5.5 games that this team has worked on together, the only time they've done a female protagonist is in the expansion of Persona 3 Fez. In fact, for Persona 4 specifically, a game attempting to emulate mystery novels, the director said they could not create a female protagonist, even in a remake, because a male character was more natural for the role of coming from a big city to a small country town. If Naoto is meant to be taken seriously, then they'd be violating their own standard, and partaking in what many Naoto fans would apparently consider some great societal misogyny. Some would say it's not very woke that there's fewer lines of dialogue in the game dedicated to workplace discrimination, representation in media, and misogyny faced by Naoto than there are about her boob size. You know, some would say that, the woke people. I think it's obvious that this was comparatively a low priority. It's something they acknowledge, they're willing to virtue signal a little bit of lip service toward it, so that no one gets the wrong idea. But they don't display a more complicated commentary than simple acknowledgement. And clearly they had different goals in mind for crafting Naoto. Goals that, were it not for this discourse, would probably be obvious, because it's literally half the damn game. They want you to date her. Let me explain the design philosophy, judgment-free of course. A lot of time when Persona 4 wants to deliver fan service, it does so by crafting situations in which the subject is embarrassed. In terms of sheer efficiency, scenes like the camping trip or the school festival don't strictly need, and would go by faster without, the reluctance of Chie and Yukiko. And of course, Persona 4 would never waste the player's time by artificially elongating a cutscene. So there must be an intention behind that, and what stands out to me is that these moments facilitate embarrassment. Even Rise, who bucks the trend by not just being a willing but confident participant, has moments of shyness or shame in her social link. If I'm to put this into terms even an alien can understand, blushing is considered cute. Really the motivation isn't any deeper than that. And Naoto has a unique quality in this regard, in that she can be extremely embarrassed by something completely mundane. This is exemplified in the Christmas Eve date, where Naoto's flirtatious yet sincerely heartfelt gesture is to wear the girl's uniform in front of you. Every other girl just wears it normally, so it achieves an effect that only someone with Naoto's backstory could have. And whenever Naoto is involved with stuff with all the other girls, she has the justification to be way more embarrassed than all of them. Take the festival I just mentioned. She doesn't even go on stage for it. A member of the intended audience playing the game is meant to imagine how cute she must look in that moment. For some people, this is more effective than just showing them directly, and can build a more personal connection. I would argue the fact that the in-game festival audience loves Naoto over this is an acknowledgement that developers are aware of how effective this is to a certain type of person. Speaking of which, it's not just the fear of being openly feminine that's appealing to some people, it's the process and payoff of her feminization, which is to say, the player gets to do a big Ali Sheedy. Now, this isn't for everyone. You can probably tell this isn't for everyone, but some people like it. She gets a bit of an Ali Sheedy in the epilogue. Many people think she looks cuter. Other people have said that she goes from the best thing in the game to looking as old as me. It's in the eye of the beholder. But with Naoto, it's not just something that happens. The player gets a sense of progression and involvement with it as they help her through her social link. And if you're playing an RPG, obviously you love progression. That's really the guiding design philosophy of the modern Persona series, just if the developers think it's attractive, or if they think it would make the money. This is important for all the woke Persona fans to understand. If you're thinking, gee, I sure hope they add a gay romance option or a trans character, you gotta realize it's probably not gonna happen unless the new director is gay or a chaser. Profit incentive isn't going to move the needle either, because Atlas fans will give the money for anything, even if it's literally the same game that came out 3 years ago. Which is to say, try not to be too disappointed when Persona 4 Revival comes out and they don't make everyone gay. But alright, I think I've been a little too harsh to the woke people of the world so far. I have to admit, I do agree with them on one thing. As I said, romantic appeal was the highest priority of the creators, and I think that there are problems that emerge from their pursuit of moe, either as a direct result or by unintended consequence. These flaws were likely exacerbated by the messy development, but considering most of them either remained or got worse going into Persona 4 the Golden, I feel it's only fair to point them out. I've already shown an example of this, Kanji's immediate dismissal of misogyny in the police department, where we are given no clear indication that he's meant to be understood as wrong. But there's a much bigger example, one which I believe is the source of a lot of discourse surrounding this character. Naoto's narrative is one of desistance. To call back to the intro, she wanted to be a boy and then stopped wanting to be a boy. But it's about more than that. It's about why she wanted to be a boy in the first place, and it makes an argument for why she should stop wanting to be a boy. One of the ways it makes this point is by having Shadow Naoto advocate the opposite viewpoint. Shadow Naoto keeps going on about a body alteration procedure, where it's clear that she's trying to completely rewrite Naoto's genetic code to turn her into an adult male. The rest of the story makes it very clear that although this would turn Naoto into her image of a cool detective, although it would remove a lot of barriers in life, it's ultimately not the right answer. The story gives commentary on a desire to be the opposite gender. It evokes the idea of sex change, even consider the character who is, coincidentally, the exact minimum age to receive transgender treatment in Japan. But it only ever talks about the applications of this for a character who is not trans. It's like a review of a wrist brace for someone without hand pain. And because modern Persona has clung to divinely ordained archetypes, this narrative is conveyed with the language of essentialism. I brought up Horo Musuko at the beginning, not just because I wanted to convey that my analysis of Naoto is not through an exclusively contemporary Western lens, but also because I think it avoids being like Persona 4. Horo Musuko can't be said to have a one-sided view on gender identity, because Yoshino isn't the only character to whom the subject is relevant. There's also Nitori, there's Makoto, there's Yuki. Gender imbalance aside, the manga is able to express more than just, this isn't the right answer. It says, it's the right answer for some people, but not for others. With the motivations of Naoto and Shadow Naoto, the game is not just depicting the idea of transgender pressure, a talking point used to delegitimize trans identity and encourage calls for restriction on the accessibility of trans healthcare, but also transgender recruitment, the almost half a century old idea meant to demonize trans people as a threat to society. I'm going to make a comparison that's so unflattering I hope no one will pause their live reaction to say they agree with it. This is identical to what happens in 2023 comedy film Lady Ballers, produced by American conservative company The Daily Wire, wherein the daughter of the protagonist declares her desire to be a boy due to advantages afforded to the opposite sex. The protagonist quickly dissuades her, first by saying that it's impossible, and then by talking about the benefits of womanhood. And I think that's what the woke haters of the game have identified. Although many of them speak assumptively or without detailed articulate argumentation, they're grasping onto part of the game which resembles the worst shit they've ever seen, old talking points they've been experiencing forever. And even granting that the Persona 4 writing team lacked knowledge or intent on this matter, experiencing it blind is going to evoke the same emotional reaction regardless of whether or not it's intentional. Which is to say, it's no wonder they're fucking mad. Now, in a just world, I could end the video right here, but I know there's a very specific group of people who have understood this viewpoint and attempted to counter it. So, in the spirit of Persona 4, we're gonna keep going so I can tackle the final boss of Naoto Discourse. I knew from the beginning I had to address through sheer inevitability the work of Hiding in Private, aka Hiding in Public, a creator who seems like a generally kind individual who's made plenty of videos which I enjoy. They're responsible for a nearly 15-hour, 150,000 word long video essay about Persona 4, dubbed The Ultimate Persona 4 Analysis. Each individual segment was posted as its own video, with some revisions for the final product. I have a bit of a general problem with this video series. One small thing I feel exemplifies my issue is that Hiding does not, in almost 15 hours of discussing this game, bring up Hanako, who they consider the only poorly handled character in the entire game. Hanako isn't the most important character ever, but if Hiding considers her practically the worst part of the game, then it's an odd omission. It gives the impression that their goal of exhaustive explanation and assessment was secondary to the desire of making Persona 4 look as good as possible, which is evident in their defense of almost everything about it that's considered controversial in the West. I think this is most evident in the video about Naoto, which is the longest individual segment of the entire series. I actually think this video is good when it's talking about anything that isn't gender, so I don't want to trash the quality of their analysis of etymology references or Naoto's age-related character arc when I say I took issue with it. Putting interpretation aside, this features some of the worst failures of research from Hiding. Aside from the Google search trend a bit, which I'll go over later, there is an extended segment where Hiding reaches for a real-life comparison for Naoto, and somehow lands upon Ron Stallworth, a black man who pretended to be white to infiltrate the KKK. This implies to me that Hiding did not know about detransitioners, which not only obviously applies much more to Naoto, but would have arguably been more effective with the intention of defining her as not being trans. But maybe that conclusion wouldn't have mixed well with Hiding's later argument.
I think this uncertainty in aspects of her social link certainly opens her up to reasonable discussion, not to if Naoto is trans, as people classically think of such, but a possible non-binary or similar more nuanced identity. I think if Naoto and Persona 4 was theoretically written in the modern day instead of 2008, and existed within that time period and reality, from what we know of her, it's not certain that she would identify as cis, at least.
You'll notice here, by the way, that Hiding is engaging in a sort of cultural relativism, which is interesting, because in their video on Sayoko Uehara, Hiding rejects the idea of excusing the game for its time period or culture. But the Naoto video is built on this. There is this extended section arguing that the average person in late aughts Japan wouldn't know about LGBT or transgender topics where the only source is Google search trends. Even if you agree with the idea here, the argument doesn't really hold water, because we're not talking about some random average person in Japan. We're talking about a specific set of individuals. If you're a big Atlas fan, you should know that the same writing team almost immediately went on to make Catherine, which had a major trans character. And they already made Persona 3, which had a one-off trans NPC who was given an expanded portrayal in Portable just 1 year after 4. Katsura Hashino himself was also the director of Digital Devil Saga, and if you know the plot of the game, then you know why I bring it up. And I should hope all the people working on the Persona series have played Persona 2, a game with multiple minor trans NPCs, most of whom speak about sex change. The creative team is not quite as ignorant on this matter as Hiding would like to claim. In fact, they have a history showing a clear willingness to depict this exact subject. And with the exception of Digital Devil Saga, Hiding had played all of these games and is attuned to discussion surrounding them. They should have known most of this. Perhaps this omission was a product of ignorance, but it ended up being very convenient for them as a means to deny the obvious. Hiding is reluctant to even acknowledge that the body alteration procedure would turn Naoto into an adult male, because that would make the sex change comparison very easy to make. The one time Hiding approaches doing so is when arguing it's all just a reference to Flowers for Algernon. It's an odd hook because it references a surgery that seems to give the subject what they want but only makes things worse. Isn't a contradiction when we all know the game thinks that the surgery would be bad for Naoto? The metaphor is just another avenue through which the game communicates the same idea. It doesn't alter or add anything new to what came before. It's just repeating itself, as Persona 4 loves to do. It's also ludicrous to argue that an optional weapon would be more important for understanding the intent of the story than the actual story. Hiding is grasping onto small details instead of confronting the incredibly obvious fact that
it's in referral to gender affirmation surgery.
Anyone could tell you, wherever they are on any sort of spectrum, whether they love the game or hate it, that it is alluding to a
cartoonish sex change operation.
Even the biggest fans of Atlas, with tons of knowledge on Japanese culture, will inform you that Naoto's dungeon directly invokes
reconstruction surgery.
And even if you were to argue that you're smarter and more correct than everyone else, I hope you should understand the importance of the fact that a completely reasonable person, merely neutrally observing the work, is going to come away concluding that Shadow Naoto is making an
attempt to directly change her gender.
It is the most obvious, straightforward, intuitive, instinctive conclusion. And Hiding knows that, but they don't want it to be true, so they pump out a fog of mystification and hope you fail to see the truth. And it's all over a video game character. But that's not the worst part of Hiding's video, in my opinion. That comes when they're forced to defend what is possibly the game's most controversial dialogue option. For those of you unaware, in Naoto's rank 6 social link, in response to her lamenting that she wasn't born male, the player has the option to say, Naoto ga onna de ureshi, meaning I'm happy that Naoto is female, localized in English directly as I'm glad you're a girl. I have to specify the original Japanese text because this line is so bad that people have tried to defend the game by lying and pretending it's a mistranslation, and other people who should know better have accepted that lie out of sheer desire to believe it. If you look up this line in its original language, you'll find a bunch of Japanese fans complaining about it as well, so it can hardly be attributed to some cultural difference. And there's a reason for that. Discounting Ayabihara, this is the only social link in the entire series with a distinct and delayed lover's route flag, meaning if the player wants to enter a relationship with Naoto, they have to ignore the answer that addresses Naoto and comforts her in her insecurities with, well, as Hiding put it,
and I'm glad you're a girl felt creepy to me.
This is actually the reason why I think this is the worst part of the video. Hiding experienced the work firsthand, reacted strongly to it, and then at a later point decided to try and reinterpret it through a lens in which it is good, engaging in further cultural mystification in the process. It's disappointing that Hiding displays an incredible capacity for critical thinking, and then only applies it here to avoid having a critical thought. This is a pretty long section, I don't want to cut it up, so I'm just going to have the quote scrolling again. The first thing I have to note is that this is not supported by the text. Naoto never reflects in this moment and provides this explanation, in part because, as mentioned a long time ago, she never brings up sexism she has experienced. Hiding is only basing this on the lover's route flag. His description is also inaccurate. Hiding claims Naoto already knows that gender doesn't matter, and therefore the statement doesn't make her happy. But if you actually pick that option, she first reacts with a shocked expression and then blatantly says that hearing this makes her happy. You also get the maximum amount of points for saying this, meaning we can use the mechanics as an objective indicator of the character's affinity to a given statement. And she literally likes it as much as possible. The same is not true for I'm glad you're a girl. Naoto openly does not like the statement, and not just in a tsundere way. You don't get any points for this option. This activates the lover's route not because it's the kinder, more profound sentiment, but because it's flirtatious. It implants within her mind the idea that the protagonist is into her. And, this should go without saying, but this would be a weird thing to say to somebody in real life. It's to the point where even if Hiding's interpretation held up, I'd question what motivation a writer would have to contrive a scenario in which such a thing is the optimal solution. Just picture someone saying this to you. In fact, if your friend said to you, in a moment of vulnerability, I wish I was born male, would you respond, I like that you're a girl? I imagine most people would not. This line immediately undermines the idea that Naoto is forming her own internal sense of identity, free from external pressure, because it presents her with a new external pressure. Someone who is very important to her has his own opinion of what she should be, and he feels strongly enough about it to tell her. Is this not a complete contradiction of what most people claim the message of her arc is meant to be? If you pursue the lover's route, Naoto's arc isn't one where she wants to stop chasing after the approval of others to form her own identity. It's one where she goes from seeking approval from the police department to seeking approval from you.
Instead of changing who she is for people who don't accept her, she wants to tailor herself to the people who love her regardless of who she is.
But now they're doing it for slightly different reasons that are the right reasons.
And if anyone is about to argue that the game doesn't imply the protagonist having any influence on Naoto's decisions, then I should mention a scene that Hiding neglected to cover, the Valentine's Day event. I was actually surprised when I played through the PS2 version and found out this wasn't there, because that means this team had 4 years of hindsight and still put this shit in the golden.
あなたといると僕っていう存在がどんどん曖昧になっていくんです。僕の好きな僕でいたい。でもそれ以上にあなたの好きな僕でいたい。そんな風に考えてしまって、僕ってなんだろうって。僕本当はあなたに決めてほしいのかもしれません。僕のすべてを、この気持ちをあなた色に染めてほしいっていうのかな。
I'm taking a moment to pause here, not just because I feel this moment has already proven the point, that she is premising her own self-acceptance on the acceptance of you, that the player character is influencing her sense of identity, but also because I want to give context for the dialogue options that show up here. Because this is literally the end of the game, there are no consequences or lasting effects for any of these. The game does not mechanically preference one over another, but I think that's also a bad thing, because there's one line of dialogue which I consider to be the smoking gun. I want to change you. To which Naoto responds,
はい。どうしよう。なんだか今幸せです。
I just can't believe no one talks about this moment. I'm not just calling out Hiding here. Even people who are anywhere from mildly to harshly critical of the game fail to mention it. This option, aside from not being disincentivized, is actually completely in line with the lover's route. After all, in order to raise the flag in the first place, the player has to declare what they desire from Naoto. As I said before, the entire appeal of her character lies in the process of her feminization, encouraged by the player's input. And of course, the developers clearly thought it was in line with the lover's route because they put it in the game, and as the final romantic cutscene for Naoto. Not to repeat myself, but I think this is a testament to how little the people involved with this discourse have actually engaged with the game in question. If this line were in any other gender controversy debate, it would be a nuclear fucking bomb, a total end of discussion. But because no one knows what they're talking about here, and possibly because of the double standard applied by those who do, the debate rages on. I'm under no illusion that this video will single-handedly end the discourse surrounding Naoto. In the first place, people would have to see this video, and beyond that, they'd have to be willing to have their minds changed. It's quite likely that among the people who even bother to listen, most will do so only through a reaction posted by someone who is way more popular than me. Someone who will pause every few sentences, decimating the flow of my argumentation and distancing points from context, all to deliver disagreement without citation. Just enough to make an audience feel like I'm not even making any sense at all. But I hope this video will at least help to clear some of the fog and bring us closer to seeing the truth. If we do reach the end of it all, if we have found consensus on what happens in the game and what it means, then the debate would only escape the bounds of Persona 4 and become a matter of ideology. How do you feel about the ideas that are expressed by Naoto's arc? And does it matter? Well, I can't give you that. Your answer can only be your own, but I can show you an opportunity to speak it. On screen now and in the description is a link to Trans Lifeline, a grassroots nonprofit offering support to trans people. A few months ago, I featured on a charity livestream marathon with fellow YouTuber and friend of the channel Skyhoppers, and later with another fellow YouTuber and friend of the channel Darkfry, so I figured they're a good cause.
いえ、いいんです。答えは知りたくない。こんなの初めてです。謎があって、答えが分かっているのに、僕はその答えから目をそらしたいと思っている。冷静に状況を分析しようとすると、どうしてかもう一人の自分が止めるんです。傷つくだけだって。僕は今のところその声に従ってる。真実を追求する者として失格ですよね。